Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Mike Wilson, who's the founder of Blueprint Retirement Advisors. Mike, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. It's nice to be here.
Love your name and love Blueprint Retirement Advisors. That's a section of my website, and I'm not an engineer, but I love process and just show me the way and tell me the next step and let me check off the box. So it gives me that connotation that when you work with your clients, you're going to lay out a blueprint, and it's going to be like this playbook, and you're going to guide them through a process. So I really love the way that it seems like you're going to work with your clients. So I want to learn all about that, but give us a little bit of your background and your entrepreneurial journey.
Well, thanks. So yeah, the naming of the company was very intentional with that in mind, that it is a blueprint. It is a process of step-by-step progress. And a great way to start. So my journey has been in the financial industry for over 30 years. I was owner and operator of a captive insurance agency with a very neighborly insurance company for the last 30 years or prior to this. And I did well. I had a good agency and I was enjoying myself. But I knew that there were bigger and better solutions available. And, you know, when you're a member of a captive company like that, there are things that you can and cannot do. Yes. And I just reached a point where, as much as I love serving my clients in that way, I knew I could do things better for them. And I wanted to do that. And so I took the leap with my wife's blessing. We took the leap right before COVID hit. And so it's been a challenge, but a really wonderful learning experience. And now I know that there's not a single solution that I have to withhold from a client. So,
and you mentioned being a captive agent on the property and casualty side of things, right? But in your world of investment and financial services and retirement advice, there are captive situations there, and you being an independent, you're not limited to things, and you can just pick any of the big names in the financial services, and you just have to wonder, like, ooh, is my contact here, are they telling me this because it's for my best interest, or is the corporation telling them this month we're selling this product, or here's what we have to sell because it's all we have? So I think that being that independent voice really brings some flexibility and really transparency to your clients, right?
It absolutely does. You know, all the folks that work for those companies, they're good folks, sure, but they're not legally bound to act as a fiduciary in the best interest of their clients. And they probably do in a lot of cases, but in this case, now in my new world, I am legally bound to do that. And again, always operated that way. It just gives me flexibility to point people in directions that you know, quote unquote, Big Brother might not have approved of in the past. So
exactly. So now you specialize in working with business owners, or what is your typical target audience that you're serving?
So it's a great question. I do focus a lot of my efforts on business owners, but in reality, small to medium-sized business owners are still individuals, and they're doing what they're doing because they ultimately want lifestyle, retirement, and some kind of legacy. So there's a business angle to it, but they're always still individuals, and they have to have individual consideration. So it's a focus, a marketing focus to businesses, but working with individuals is ultimately what we do too. So.
Yeah, you know, I think that the SBA, the Small Business Administration, calls a small business, I think this is still accurate, 500 employees or less. And I'm thinking, oh my word, that's a pretty big business. So yeah, whether it's an individual, meaning like a solopreneur, or it could just be a handful of employees, it's still a smaller business. So they act like individuals. So typically when you're working with someone, and maybe they're referred to you, maybe you go to church with them, maybe they're in your circle of influence, what is typically the need that they are coming to you for, and where are you starting with in looking to give them some advice?
You know, I think if you talk to small business owners and ask them what their top three frustrations are going to be, certainly taxes are going to be involved in there, certainly cash flow, but then long-term planning, the efficiency of their retirement and their legacy. Those are usually the reasons that we end up starting to talk with someone.
And those three things are so joined at the hip because I think of this the picture of like the bucket and the holes and the water flowing in and flowing out. That's the cliche, right? So you're going, okay, well, guess what? Let's see if we can, with long-term planning, let's make sure that there's not as a flow of water going out of your financial bucket. We know we can't plug up all the holes 100% of the time, but some of the outflow could be taxes. So let's see how we can best prepare and mitigate those. Can't eliminate, but maybe we can mitigate those. And then cash flow is so huge. Whether you're an individual, family, or a business, like you're saying, cash flow is key. And it's the flow of incoming revenue and then where it goes. Well, you want to be able to divert some of that into some of those long-term planning. But talk a little bit about what business owners can do with those taxes. What is the first place that you would start with saying, okay, let's address some of this, because if we can plug up that hole as much as possible, that helps with the cash flow to put it in other places.
Yeah, so it's funny that you use that analogy of the bucket. The one visual image that people don't see when they think about that bucket analogy is that there's literally people trying to make those holes bigger to make that water leak out faster. Yeah. And what we see happening in Washington right now, it doesn't matter what color hat your favorite team wears, they're all spending money, and the only way they have to make up for that is to raise their revenue, which is taxes. So, I think there's a lot of frustration from business owners, not only in what they're paying out, but I think there's a little voice in the back of their head that whispers to them that there's got to be something more when it comes to tax strategy. It's got to be something more than they're doing currently. And so there's a lot of frustration. When I start to talk with people, I hear a lot, I've got a CPA. Like, okay, we need CPAs. They're great people to have on our team, but CPAs typically aren't giving very much forward-thinking tax advice. Yeah. They're looking backwards. It's kind of a rear-view mirror approach. And the kind of planning that I do with people is we'll start off talking about not so much about what did you do going backwards, but what can you do going forwards? How can we structure your business and your income and the way that you receive income in such a way as to make it as tax advantaged as possible? And, truthfully, the advice that most business owners get is the same advice. It's the same advice that most wage earners get. You can have some expenses that you can deduct, and you can have some money that you can defer, and that's it. That's tax strategy for the majority of the small business world. And so they're frustrated by that, and they want to know if there's something else.
Well, that begs the question: what else is there?
Yeah.
What are you guiding them to think to look at?
So the tax code is loaded with things that business owners can use to improve their tax position. There's of course, deferrals and deductions are helpful, but you don't grow a business, you don't get wealthy off of deferrals and deductions. There's a common saying that the tax code is written for business owners. So in the code, you may not know this, a lot of people don't know this, there are tons of opportunities for tax-free income, ways to receive money from your business without it being taxed. In fact, there's so many ways that the IRS has written a publication specifically issuing guidance to business owners about how to take advantage of those tax-free fringe benefits and tax-free opportunities. And I would venture to say, and I mean, I was in business on my own for 20 years before I learned about these things, and not once ever did my CPA ever say, hey, have you thought about these tax-free options? Because it just doesn't come up.
What's one example that people don't normally think about?
So large corporations can give benefits to their employees, or I should say corporations can give benefits to their employees for educational reimbursement. Okay. My daughter went to work for a research hospital, and they had a tuition reimbursement benefit. Right. The benefit to the employee was free to them, tax-free to them, and right. The employer was able to write that off. So not only was it a tax-free benefit that the employee could receive, but it was a tax deduction that the employer could make. And properly structured, I can be an employee of my own corporation. So there are ways right. to use those tax rules to get that kind of income tax-free and to do other things. And there's a bunch of them. I never walk through the door ready to prescribe one particular thing for someone because I don't know what their situation is at the very beginning. We've got to analyze, do proper triage, so to speak. But that's just one idea or one possibility of using that.
Yeah, it's like if all you have is a hammer, then everything you look at is a nail. So you need to have the whole tool belt and to go in there and say, okay, well, let's roll up your sleeves and figure out what you need, see what works best, see what resonates best with you. And I was talking to someone just yesterday that was saying, real estate is a wonderful investment for many people, for some people, and for others, no. Because you just got to see what your background is, what you feel like, your risk tolerance, all of those things. So
Right.
what else are you working with your small business owners when it comes to taxes? You help them see some of the deductions and maybe some ways to structure to ways that maybe that water's already, running out of the bucket. And maybe this is a way that you can go, look, the typical, and this, I think you'll agree with this, Mike, typically business owners are like, we need to grow, we need more revenue, top line, top line, top line. And that's wonderful. But if all it's doing is running right back out the holes, so if you can start plugging up the holes first, now you've got more money to work with. And then, yes, always look for getting more revenue coming in. But, you talk about corporations and they do things differently when it comes to taxes. Can small business owners do some of those same things? And you mentioned one there, but what are some of the other things they can model from the success of larger companies?
Yeah, so one of the things that we always start with when we're talking with a client is about their entity choice. How did they choose to form their business, whether it's an S corporation or an LLC or a C or whatever? And everyone's kind of got an idea of, well, I did this. I talked to a gentleman yesterday, asked him about how he was formed, and he said, well, I did this, but I don't know why, or I don't even know if that was best. They just followed the advice of somebody. And entity choice can really influence what tax opportunities you have. And a lot of people believe, I think incorrectly, that once you choose one, you've got to stick with it. Or if you choose one, you can only have one. And it's safe to say that lots of businesses operate where not all of the activities of their business is related to their core business. And some of those activities could be farmed out to another company. Yeah. And so there are opportunities for multiple entity choices to be able to take advantage of some of the tax rules that wouldn't ordinarily be available if you just had one entity choice. I know that sounds vague, but it really is true. You think about the example of Chrysler. Chrysler, obviously a huge corporation, they sell cars, but they don't just sell cars. They make cars, they make parts, they do all sorts of things. Chrysler has a separate company called Mopar, and Mopar is their shipping entity. And they don't have to have Mopar. They could ship stuff in Chrysler trucks. Right. There was a tax reason behind what they did and why they did it. And without getting into the weeds of why Chrysler chose that particular way, there are things that even small businesses, the body shop, the auto dealership, the marketing agency, the architectural firm, they can do certain things in entity choice and gain some advantages that they might not have otherwise had.
And so just like we should always stay up to date on new and fresh ways to improve ourselves personally, professionally, spiritually, business-wise, all of that. Maybe you're describing some of these things that maybe that outside third-party perspective can look inside that business and go, hey, let's take a look at this piece, and let's polish this one up here. And maybe the business owner is kind of too close to the forest to see the trees, and someone like yourself looking from the outside coming in to say, let's look at that entity choice, and let's make sure that all the tax benefits, nothing strange, nothing elaborate and really confusing, but just things like you're talking about. So I think that sometimes we think, oh, we're good because we did this thing years ago. Well, is that the best decision for you now?
Well, and the small business owner is consumed with the urgency of making the business work, and that's reasonable. That's why they're there. And so a lot of those decisions are they have become set it and forget it kind of things. And for a lot of them, they're paying for tax advice, or what they see as tax advice. They're paying someone, again, very necessary, very important part of the team is a CPA, but they're paying for the advice, and they would think, well, if there was something else I needed to be doing, my CPA would tell me. But the CPA is not a lawyer under most circumstances, and the CPAs aren't going to give legal advice for how you should structure your business necessarily. They're going to be very careful about that. And so a lot of times, even in my own professional life, I've brought things to my CPA to say, what do you think about this? We could talk through it and look at the options, look at the code, look at the tax court rulings and things like that, and get them to say, yeah, that works. That makes sense. So small business owners don't want to be in the position to have to bring their CPAs something for validation. So the role that I feel is to bring that in and bring the team together that can do the analysis for that business owner so that they can say, yeah, that makes sense. Let's give this a try.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, and the other thing that I think is something important to keep in mind is being able, like what you said about taking advantage of certain tax benefits or changing the entity structure. When you were describing that point a minute ago, it was making me think of the old question that people say, well, if you had this really bad need for surgery, would you feel more comfortable if they were putting you under and the last thing you saw was a, I don't know, 70-year-old surgeon walking in the door, or a 30-year-old who had just gotten out of medical school, and it could go either way, but the point is people would say, I want the one that is up to date with the freshest, most, great techniques. Now, yes, there's something to be said for experience, but I think that when you can come in and say, look, we keep updated on the top tax strategies, the top long-term, retirement planning strategies. Let's see where that fits in with you. And then you look at this company, the small business that you're working with, and you go, well, hey, let's think about this. And here's some options to consider. So what do you guys do to stay cutting edge on some of the top financial and tax trends so that your clients are getting the best strategies out there?
Well, and so I'm going to answer that by way of continuing on with your operating room analogy. The best operating scenario that I could think of in that analogy is to have the 30-year-old working next to the 70-year-old.
Yes.
Having a team of people. So in the team that we work with, we've got financial planners, we've got legal people, tax attorneys, and CPAs. The tax attorneys and the CPAs are constantly keeping up with what's going on. Now, we know what techniques we have used in the past, and so we pay attention to those to make sure that they are still current. And there are certain things that the IRS is working on things right now. There's debates in Congress going on right now about certain things. So we just pay attention to those and watch them. And each time we have a client that we're going to work with, we're going to sit down with the tax attorney and the CPA and say, okay, is this code still good? Or are these rulings still valid? Has anything new come out on the subject? So that we're never putting someone in the position to, be giving them, day old bread, so to speak. And because they're going to be doing these things year after year after year, following these techniques, we're checking with the clients that we've worked with in the past to make sure what we gave them is still good. And we just do that by paying attention to what's going on at the IRS, paying attention to what's going on in Congress as it relates to these subjects, and making sure that we're staying in contact with our clients. Because surprise, surprise, sometimes business owners change what they're doing. They change their business, they change their direction, they change how they do it. They go from being an employer to getting employees through a PEO, and those changes we have to be aware of. So it's not just a matter of setting a plan in place and then pushing the boat away from the dock. We stay in contact to make sure that they're still appropriate.
And if Mike Wilson had to know all the cutting edge ins and outs of every single one of those, forget about it. There's no earthly way. Reminds me of that example. Remember, maybe you've heard this before, like when, Henry Ford was like on trial and they were like, well, what's this? And he's like, I don't know. And well, tell us that. I don't know. And he goes, well, listen, I don't know because I don't need to know, but at one push of a button, I've got the head of my whatever department come in and he knows all the top. So surround yourself with professionals and have this team that the legal, tax and financial and all of these people are coming together and you feel like you're royalty. It's like, look at all these people serving my, wealth planning and retirement planning needs.
Well, and that's the kind of team that typically doesn't exist for the small to medium business owners. Large corporations have a team of attorneys and a team of accountants and CPAs. They have those people. The small guy doesn't. And so we basically are giving the small business sort of VIP or backstage access to the kinds of things that the larger corporations do without the cost. Or, if you're really, really wealthy, 50 million plus, you'll hire what's called a family office. Well, those guys are doing some really creative things. But if you don't have $50 million, you're not going to get to it. And this provides that team to be able to help them do it. I remember the dean of my graduate school, business school, came in and met with all the MBA candidates. And he said, this is the only thing I remember verbatim. And he said, a good MBA doesn't have to know how to do everything. They just have to know how to find someone who can.
Yeah.
That's the idea, is to, if we don't know it off the top of our head, we'll find them and we'll investigate them, and we interview them and we check them out and we make sure that they get what we get, and
because it's your reputation on the line with your clients. You don't want your clients to be dealt with in a way that doesn't align with the blueprint you are laying out and your brand that you are building.
Exactly, and even more than my reputation, which, yes, is important to me. What's more important is the life of that client.
Yeah.
And the lives that depend on that client, right? The children who will never have that conversation with me or my partners, right? The spouse or the charities or whatever that depend on that person. We've got multiple layers of integrity relationships that we have to provide for, and if we do it the right way, they're going to be okay.
Yep. Well, Mike, I think that this has been such a spectacular overview of how you serve your clients and the team aspect, and plugging out some of these holes with, taxes and structuring the right things within a business. If someone is interested in learning a little bit more and maybe having you give a quick peek into their situation financially and in their business, what's the best way that they can reach out and connect with you?
There are a couple of ways. Obviously, they can go to my website, which is blueprintra.com, and there's lots of information there. My contact information is there. Of course, they can email me, mike@blueprintra.com. I also have a very small and humble YouTube channel called Retirement Thinking, and I've got videos on there both about business-oriented things and also about individual things, and they can kind of see me and learn a little bit more about me that way without having me in the room or on the phone with them. There's a couple of different ways.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
My pleasure, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully this was going to be useful to your listeners.
Yes, thank you so much.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.